Even though it's March, the conversation continues, and we are thrilled to speak with today's guests. Today's topic is navigating challenge in your own creative way. So we're going to kind of twist the conversation. We're coming at it from a different angle this edition. And we want to talk about restoring power and control in one's own life and one's own career, and making collaborative, creative choices that really align with who you are and what your deepest held values are in the world. So we're really looking forward to speaking with the two of you, because Sarah has just said wonderful things about how you have both navigated both your working career and also your personal lives in a very singular and aligned way. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that, Judy and TJ. So I'm Stella Orange. I'm one of the co-founders of the creative and consulting agency Los Peregrinos. Also with me by my virtual side is Sarah Du-Whitsitt, also co-founder of Los Peregrinos. Hi, Sarah. All right, fantastic. And today's conversation, as I mentioned, is navigating challenge in your own creative way. Boy, there are some stories to be told here, friends. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but welcome Judy, welcome TJ. I just want to read your official bios so people have a sense of who you are. And then we want to roll up our sleeves and get to the story of how the heck did you two get here? So with all the twists and turns and courageous decision-making, I would assume that you've made along the way. So Judy Melinek, MD, is a board-certified forensic pathologist and CEO of Pathology Expert, Inc. She's a graduate of Harvard College, and she earned her medical degree and completed a residency in pathology at UCLA. Her further training in forensics at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner is the subject of the memoir, Working Stiff, 2 years, 262 bodies, and the making of a medical examiner, co-authored with her husband, writer TJ Mitchell. Melinek and Mitchell have launched a medical examiner detective series with the mystery novel First Cut, and are writing the sequel Crosscut as we speak. Today, Dr. Melinek is CEO of the medico-legal consultancy Pathology Expert, Inc., and performs autopsy as a forensic pathologist in Oakland, California. She writes a regular column for MedPage Today. She travels nationally and internationally to lecture on an anatomic and forensic pathology, and has been consulted as a forensic expert in many high-profile legal cases and in print, online, and broadcast media. Welcome, Dr. Melinek. We're so pleased to have you here. And then TJ Mitchell is a writer with an English degree from Harvard, who worked in the film industry before becoming a full-time stay-at-home dad. He is the New York Times best-selling co-author of the 2014 memoir, Working Stiff, 2 years, 262 bodies, and the making of a medical examiner with his wife, Dr. Julie Melinek. He and Dr. Melinek have collaborated again to write First Cut, the debut novel in the Jessie Teska Medical Examiner Detective series, coming from Hanover Square Press, which is, I think, an imprint of HarperCollins. In January 2020, they live and work in San Francisco, where they're writing Crosscut, the second book in the Jessie Teska series, and that is expected out in January of 2021. So welcome, TJ. We're thrilled to have you here as well.
Thank you.
So, I mean, Sarah and I were talking before you folks arrived, and we said, geez, there's a story about how you got here. So I think we'll maybe start with you, Judy, and start there. How on earth, you started as a doctor, a forensic pathologist, medical examiner, and now you're writing books with your husband. Tell us a little bit about the road that got you here.
I mean, the road is that of partnership, because we met when we were undergraduates at Harvard. I was pre-med, TJ was interested in theater and was an English major. We've always collaborated well together. In fact, while we were at Harvard, we did theater productions together, where TJ would direct and I would produce. So I managed the money, I managed the scheduling and the casting with him, and then he would make the creative decisions on how the show would be staged, but we would work together to try to create the final product. So we did that all through college. And then even before writing together, I went through medical school and he was working in the film industry at the time. So we learned how to manage a household. I mean, just like any married couple does, we took on our different roles.
We've collaborated on 4 kids.
That's right, four children. So, and what we've learned in a lifetime of working together, because it's been, we had our 22-year anniversary, wedding anniversary just this past February. It's you always work to your strengths, and what is the term you use? No overlapping skill set.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, that's how we pretty much function. Is that if I'm at my wit's end with the kid, I go to TJ and I go, okay, your turn. Tag, you're it now.
This is especially relevant for our working together as writers. A lot of married couples will ask us, how is it that you write murder mysteries without one of you committing a murder if you're working with your spouse? And the secret is we have no overlapping skill set.
I was just going to ask, so no overlapping skill set, that means that if we're to look at a Venn diagram of the skill sets that you both bring to the partnership, there's no overlap. It's
well, there is in some areas, but when it comes to the writing, there's very little.
Yeah.
Judy has the stories and she has a great imagination. And I'm one of those writers who loves to be locked in a room wrestling with adjectives all day. And she doesn't really particularly care about it.
Yeah, so, I mean, to follow the Venn diagram metaphor, I think that there is a little bit of overlap, but we negotiate that. I mean, ultimately, we work to our strengths. So when it comes to coming up with the ideas for the forensic detective series, what's going to be the next murder? How is Jesse going to find it out? That's on me. But how to actually communicate that and string that into a narrative that people will actually want to read, that's on him.
But also a lot of especially in the early stages of writing a detective novel, the plotting comes from us, where Judy will have an idea and I will shoot an idea back at her, and then we'll go for a long walk and we will trade ideas back and forth. And before you know it, we have synthesized a new direction for the story to go into by talking to each other. And then generally we go off and we do our own things.
Yeah. But we all have veto power. Like if he uses a word that has a particular scientific meaning that he's using it in a colloquial sense, but it might be legally or forensically inaccurate, then I'll veto that. Versus if I use a word that's just too cerebral and
or if Judy wants to go in a narrative direction that I know is going to be too quick for the reader because we have to string them along a little bit, we have to misdirect them, then I will insist on doing that. Yeah.
Got it. And how it must have been a very different process from the original book that you wrote, because that was a memoir of, basically all of the autopsies you had done. Is that correct, Judy?
Yeah. So the original book, Working Stiff, was a memoir, as you said, and it was narrative nonfiction. So it was very important for us, for instance, to
narrative nonfiction means a book that is true, written about true events, but it's written in a novelistic style. It has a story, and you tell that story through a very strong narrative voice.
But in nonfiction, you have to be true to what actually happened. You can't make stuff up. And that was a point of frustration for TJ to some degree, because the way we created Working Stiff is I kept a diary. I kept a journal. And I wrote down what I did every single day during my training period. That journal became the basis for the book. I had to take it out of chronological order. So initially I would do an autopsy one day. I may not find out who the person is until the next day. I wouldn't get toxicology until maybe a month later. And if it was a criminal case, I wouldn't go to court till maybe a year later. But I had to then restructure it into cases. And then we both chose the cases that we thought were most instructive, both from a scientific standpoint, a teaching point that I got, or from an emotional standpoint that I learned something.
And also in terms of story arc, every book has to have a story arc, including nonfiction books. The arc of Working Stiff is you don't learn anything about death investigation and autopsy in medical school or residency. You learn it all on the job when you get your first job in a medical examiner or coroner's office. And so young Dr. Melanik with her MD doesn't know anything about dead bodies when she starts that book, and neither do you as the reader. So the arc is you're learning it as she learns it. And sometimes we would arrange some of the death investigations to illustrate a point as we were building that story.
But TJ, being a layman, not being a physician, could actually weigh in on things like, we haven't discussed what an autopsy entails.
Right.
So he had to actually interview me at the beginning.
Yeah, before we could do anything else, it occurred to me, I don't actually know what an autopsy is.
Yeah.
So I sat down and interviewed my wife and asked her, what is it that you do? Like, tell me, when you go in the morning, who's there? What's the meeting like? Do you all grab coffee and sit around a table? What are you wearing? When you go into the morgue, what's the first thing you do? What are PPEs, personal protective equipment? How long does it take to put all that stuff on?
What does it look like?
Et cetera. Yeah. Do you snack in the morgue?
Yeah.
No, we do not snack in the
You
morgue.
eat in the morgue? No.
Right.
But also, just like little details that I take for granted now. He will elicit from me just in our dialogue and those feed into the details that we put in both in Working Stiff as well as in First Cut. So for instance, at one point there's a character in First Cut who comes into the morgue and Jessie is doing an autopsy and she just nods at them because you don't shake hands in the morgue.
No one shakes hands in the morgue.
You've got, your hands are dirty, so you don't shake hands. And so that little detail can inform a story, whether it's nonfiction.
And I never knew any of this because I never, like, Judy came home from work and it's not like I would say to her, so tell me, what is an autopsy? So you start with an external examination, then you do the internal examination. And what's the first cut that you make? How do you cut the ribs? I don't ask that over the dinner table, but we did sit down and ask that when we were starting writing Working Stiff.
Yeah, people, when it comes to their interest in forensics, they always want to cut to the chase. What did you find? What are the results? They're not interested in the process.
Right.
And so much of writing is a process. There's a lot of stuff we cut out too, because it's not that interesting. But the nuggets, those little details are sometimes very evocative and forensically accurate, which is what we wanted to achieve in First Cut in our novel.
But yes, also the process of writing Working Stiff was different, largely because the material was already there in a sense, or the raw material was there. The journal was there. We were restructuring it and then rewriting it. With First Cut, we're making it up whole cloth. We frozen?
Are we frozen? Or I think we're frozen.
I think we're
Sarah's frozen.
Sarah's there. Hello?
Hello.
There's Stella. Everyone's
Stella's waiting. I think Sarah.
You can hear and see us, Stella?
Yes.
Okay.
But I
can hear you and see you.
So the yellow box is around Sarah. So this is a technical difficulty.
Fascinating.
That's what I'm getting. Not frozen. Oh, there she is. Now you're unfrozen. Hi. But I can't hear you.
Oh, there it goes.
There we go.
Woo! All right.
There we go. We're back on.
I couldn't get back out of unmute. So thank you for bearing with me. And Sarah, it looks like you're moving again. So that's good. You were frozen for a moment. All right. And thanks, Andrew, for piping in and saying.
Right.
We can hear you. So then I want to go back to 2014 as well. So you've been collaborating since college, but how did it occur to the two of you to start writing? You had this journal from your work, Judy, but was this an idea that the two of you came to together? Did you always know that you were going to collaborate on books? How did that conversation arise?
Never. No, we never thought that we'd write a book. No.
Yeah. I mean, the idea came to me because all those television shows, NCIS, Bones, CSI, were just so popular, and they were so ridiculous. We actually wrote a blog piece called 7 CSI Fails. So if you Google 7 CSI Fails, you'll see all the things that drive me crazy about those shows.
Oh, that's
but I wanted to write something about the learning process, about what it's like to become a forensic pathologist, because that really hadn't been popularized. People know the forensic pathologist as the person who comes in and solves it all within 45 minutes, but not the fact that when we start, we don't know what we're doing and we have to learn. And
also when Judy was in medical school, she had one professor who gave everybody the advice, keep a journal while you're a medical student so that you can at the end see how your way of thinking has changed from being a non-scientist to being a fully fledged and accredited MD, which is a fine idea, but medical students tend to be a little busy and not have a lot of time for that.
Yeah. So when I was going into my fellowship, I thought this is the time for me to do that, to see the transition between being a doctor to being a detective.
And especially also because we were in New York City, we lived in the Bronx, and the medical examiner's office is in Midtown Manhattan, and Judy took a bus an hour down and an hour back every day. So she had the time to actually sit down and write her journal.
Yeah, but I mean, it was my idea, but then he's the English major. So at the end of 2 years of writing my journal and restructuring it, I pretty much handed it to him and I said, you're the English major here, do something with it.
Yeah, but you just glossed over the most important part.
Right.
The restructuring part is the real work that Judy did on this besides living it and writing it down. Okay. Restructuring it means taking all of those cases which were in chronological order and grouping them instead into cases, case-based studies.
And selecting the best ones out.
Yes, and also grouping them according to the manners of death, and then handing it off to me, and then I did.
But then you sat on it for about 10 years as our kids. But see,
the problem
was,
a couple of things going on.
We had infants.
Right. So I figured we had already decided that largely for financial reasons, I was going to stop working in the film industry and become a full-time stay-at-home dad, which I was eager to do. Okay. And so we did that, and I figured, this will be great. I'll just park the baby in the corner and write all day, right?
And then you realize that that's not going to happen.
10 years later, when
you wake up from a stupor.
We have 3 biological children and a foster daughter. Our foster daughter didn't come into our lives until about recently. 2 years ago when she was 15, 16 years old. But the 3 babies, once they were all in elementary school, then I had 4 or 5 hours a day, as lots of working moms and dads will tell you, to be able to actually concentrate and sit down and work. But another thing that stopped us for 10 years was the fact that Dr. Melinek started working at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner in July 1st of 2001. So when September 11th of 2001 happened, she is one of the 30 doctors who identified the remains of the World Trade Center disaster.
You'd only been on there for 2 months when that happened?
Yeah, 6 weeks, July and August, and then September 11th happened. So I was, I was still learning. I was the least experienced member of the team during a mass fatality event.
And whenever I went to work on that material, I found that I just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Until about 10 years later, when all of a sudden it stopped being our personal history and it was turning into history that we felt we had to share with other people, especially with our children's generation, because we realized that it's one of those events like the JFK assassination was for our generation, or Pearl Harbor was for our parents' generation, that set one generation apart from another in the world that they lived in. And 9/11 is that for us and our kids. And we realized that there were kids. I think one of the things that really shocked us was when we realized there are kids who are learning about 9/11 in U.S. history class in high school. And then we realized, we should really.
Yeah, when the book came out, Danny was in high school.
Yep.
And in Working Stiff, you talk about your experiences during that time, don't you, Judy?
Yes, that's towards the end, because I mean, from a structural standpoint, even though it happened early on in my fellowship, we were processing remains and identifying people over the course of the entire year, actually going into 2 years. And a lot of identification is still going on now with the advent of new forensic methods for DNA analysis and low copy number analysis, things like that.
But then again, also from a narrative perspective, you can't understand what 9/11 meant to those people who were dealing with it until you understand what an ordinary death event and death investigation is.
And 9/11 involved so many different components. There was identification, there's criminal activity, there's so many moving parts. So from a structural standpoint, even though it happened at the beginning of my fellowship, or at least the incident of the terrorist attack happened at the beginning of my fellowship, we kept it towards the end of the book so that the reader would understand what a normal autopsy is. What is it like to investigate a suicide? What is it like to investigate a homicide? What is it like to testify in court? And then leading up to 9/11 so that they could understand what a mass fatality event is.
Yeah, it's amazing just to listen to you guys talk about the amount of conversations you must have had and negotiating how these things were going to flow and how the structure was, and then you negotiating like each chapter and the creative bits around it. So it's really a testament to how well you guys do work together while raising 3, now 4 kids, and Judy working at the same time. It's quite amazing. Do you have any, like you mentioned, that you guys don't overlap with skill sets, but is there anything else that you found over the years that's been really effective in helping you do this well? Because you do it amazingly well.
Well, our skill set does overlap when it comes to parenting.
Yeah.
And we've found that the things that we do and don't do or hand off to the other one have shifted as the kids have gotten older and as Judy's work life has changed a little bit. Yeah. And as my work life has changed because,
he's got deadlines.
Yeah. With Working Stiff especially, it hadn't occurred to me that there are adults in New York in suits who have already paid us, who are waiting for me to write a book. And I didn't know how to write a book. So that was a big
until
shift.
after we made the deal, they're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap, now we got to write it.
Yeah. And it ended up being actually,
timing was good.
yeah, it was great because our kids, if you have kids, you'll know this, that when your kids get into middle school, if you are an at-home parent, sometimes you fall into the trap of still treating them like they're in elementary school and you do everything for them when you should really be making them do things on their own, giving them a
I'm
little
writing this down right now. I've got two
more responsibility for themselves. Well, we were forced to do that because all of a sudden I had to write a book, and our kids were forced to jump into that where I'd been waiting on them hand and foot before.
Right.
They didn't much like that, but it turned out to be good for them in the end.
Yeah. And now that they're teenagers, I think that they see and we role model for them how we negotiate things like, okay, you do this, I do this, I'll make dinner, you set the table, you know, all those kind of dynamics that you work out of how you integrate your work life into your personal life.
But also I'm immensely grateful that Judy has structured her professional life to give her lots of time with her family, where today, for instance, on Mondays and Tuesdays, we are in our office here in San Francisco, a literally 3-minute walk from our house, where Judy does medical legal consultation here in this office. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, she drives over to Oakland and does autopsies in Oakland. But that gives us plenty of time to work together creatively, and she can generally be home in the afternoon to help with the kids too. So if I have to drive one to soccer, then she can start dinner, et cetera. We trade off in a much more fluid way than we used to when I was the stay-at-home parent and she was working full-time, and that was, or like working out of the house with regular hours full-time.
Got it. Oh, fantastic. And so I'm going to jump around on topics. So you kind of go back in time, and you guys have just published Working Stiff, and then the next book that you wrote is completely different. It's, you know, fiction, and it's about a detective. How did you guys decide to move into that direction? Well,
it's not exactly about a detective. It's a detective novel, but the detective is a San Francisco medical examiner, loosely based on.
Got it.
Judy, right? Yeah.
So, the idea for that part of it came from the fact that TJ was working on Working Stiff. So he was doing the primary, it had been written and he was doing the editing work. Can you hear us okay? We had a little pop-up that says our internet connection. So TJ was doing the editorial work, which is, picking words, commas, parentheses, things I have no interest in whatsoever. And meanwhile,
that's what you think I sit here and do all day, huh?
You wrestle with words.
Right.
That's the non-overlapping skill set. Okay.
Words, commas, commas.
Adjectives.
She likes the words too.
Yeah. So meanwhile, I was working at the San Francisco ME's office, but I didn't have much of a creative outlet anymore because Working Stiff was in his hands. Right. And I was not happy at that job. It was not a warm and fuzzy work environment.
It was a miserable place.
It was a miserable place. The work that I was doing, I loved, but the job was not a good fit for me. And I got frustrated with politics. I got frustrated with some of the nasty characters I had to deal with on a daily basis, which is a wonderful, environment for noir. So noir fiction, the whole genre of noir.
We write in the American tradition of noir detective fiction, which means that the detective starts out in a world that is already broken and corrupt, and then there's a mystery that the detective solves.
Usually a death, a homicide.
Yeah, very doggedly goes after and solves, even at the detriment of other people and maybe even herself. But she still solves it, and in the end, the world is still a broken and corrupt place. Yeah.
And the solving the mystery doesn't fix the world, as opposed to the traditional British kind of cozy tradition of detective novels where the world is a nice and ordered place, and then there's this.
And at the end, everything is wonderful.
Right, and then the detective fixes it and then goes back to being ordered. So I was working in a difficult.
We're not saying we don't like those
like
type of stories. That just doesn't happen to be what we're writing.
And it doesn't happen to be what San Francisco's all
about.
No,
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like it was what you were living either, Judy.
Right, exactly.
So it provided this rich, fertile soil of inspiration to be. No, we're doing noir. Like this is how it tracks.
Kind of like the devil wears Prada. When you're in a bad work environment, you can channel that into a good story. And so that was what prompted my ideas for First Cut. And I had been reading detective novels. I love detective novels. I read them voraciously. TJ did not, which was actually a good thing. So again,
yeah, because it means that when we started this, I mean, I've read 1.5 million since we started on this this journey of writing detective novels. But when I started, there was no one writer who I particularly wanted to emulate.
Yeah.
So that's actually a big advantage if you think about it.
Yeah, so I had written about 100 pages or so. I had the characterizations. I had the idea for the murder that sets the story in motion. And then I also had the idea for how the detective would solve it, like what the ending would be. And then I handed it at the point that Working Stiff went to the editors and it was out of TJ's hands. And he was sitting there going like this and checking.
Yeah.
I was like, here, work on this.
Yes.
And I handed him.
And the books are actually not that different in certain ways. For instance, the narrative voice is largely the same. Yeah. Working Stiff, of course, is written in the first person because it was Judy's diary. Right. And First Cut is
my voice, so it's not hard.
First Cut also is a detective novel written in the first person, which we really enjoy. We enjoy doing. It has its set of challenges. If you write a detective novel in the first person, then everything that the reader learns about the mystery has to come through the detective's experience.
You can't be having.
So it can be a challenge, but it can also be a good way of hiding things from your reader and misdirecting your reader. So it's a lot of fun to mess with people's heads.
And Jessie's voice is an amalgam of both of our voices. It's really, she's like our child in some ways. So she's a forensic pathologist like me. Yeah. But she grew up in Massachusetts.
In Lynn, Massachusetts, near where I come from.
Yeah.
And Jessie Teska is...
And she's Polish.
Well, she's a Polish American, which is, it was important to us in creating a character, that character have shallow immigrant roots, essentially, because the immigrant experience is extremely important to both of us and who we are. Judy is an immigrant to the United States. She came here when she was 5 years old, and my grandparents were immigrants. And I'm of Irish, Italian, and Polish ancestry. The Polish part is something that we both share. I'm the descendant of Polish Catholics, and Judy's a Polish Jew.
And my grandmother spoke Polish when I was growing up.
Yeah, my grandparents spoke Polish, but in any case, we don't speak Polish. But Jessie Teska, our heroine, does, because the story is that her mom is a Polish immigrant and her dad is an American who doesn't speak Polish. She comes from a broken house in a very unhappy, abusive place, and her mom would speak to her and her brother Tommy only in Polish as sort of a secret language. So now she and Tommy have since left Lynn and moved out to California, gone native in California like Judy and I did. And they occasionally speak to each other in Polish. You know, Jessie tends to swear in Polish, as a lot of us who have, other mother tongues. Sometimes it comes lashing out at you when you're, when your emotional brain takes over your higher cognitive functions. So that's where the Polish
is a way to swear without other people understanding what you're saying.
It's also a jump start into the culture of San Francisco, which is an immigrant culture. And a place where almost everybody, or at least your parents or grandparents, come from someplace else. And that includes Jessie. So she fits right in here.
And then tell me a little bit about the event. I mean, without giving away that book, obviously, but talk about the adventures that she went on the first one, because I assume you're going to continue the series beyond.
Yes, we were fortunate to get our agent, our book agent, Jessica Papin, got us a 2-book deal to write novels, which was great because that meant as soon as we finished with First Cut, we could hand it off to the editors, and while they were working on it, we could start on Cross Cut, second book in the series, which is now almost done. But First Cut, basically what happens is Jessie comes from Massachusetts. She gets into UCLA medical school from out of state, which is very hard to do, like Dr. Melinek did. Moves to Los Angeles, like the two of us did in 1991, and like Dr. Melinek, falls immediately in love with LA and loves everything about it. Jessie ends up going to medical school residency fellowship in Los Angeles and gets her dream job as the Los Angeles County Assistant Medical Examiner. And then something happens where she has to leave that job and she has to come up to look for a new job. There are not very many forensic pathologists in this country.
Yeah,
it's only about 500.
There are a lot of jobs in forensic pathology. So that's part of the impetus for writing our books is to
But they may not be jobs any place where you want to be.
Yeah.
And if like her, if you want to stay in California, there aren't a lot of jobs. A job opens up in San Francisco. She comes and takes it essentially sight unseen. And then she finds that this morgue is a dump. It's peopled with a bunch of cranky characters.
So this sounds familiar, Judy.
Yes. Really overworked.
This sounds very, very familiar.
And then I'll just tell you, there's no spoilers, but Jessie starts investigating a death that seems like an ordinary death.
Okay.
But there's something about it that bothers her, and she pulls on that string, and there you have your detective novel.
But I should add that the first murder in the book, the one that sets the narrative, the story in motion, is based on a case that I had in San Francisco.
A real event.
A real event where a guy was sitting in a cafe and working on a laptop, and a petty thief comes in and commits a crime that is very common in San Francisco. He grabs the top of the laptop and runs off. But this time, the guy who had his computer stolen pulls out a gun and shoots at the thief, actually following him into the next store where the thief collapsed. And then the man whose laptop was stolen takes the laptop out of his hand and walks out of the store, walks away. And so I had been called out to—
Well, he shot him in the head.
He shot him in the head, yeah. I had been called out to this death scene, and I couldn't stop thinking, what is on this laptop that's worth shooting someone over? And in a lot of forensic cases, and this is a frustration that TJ and I, when I come home and tell TJ about a case that I've done, he always asks questions like, did the police catch him? Why did he do it? What was the motive? And I'm like, I don't know, because when I'm working on cases, we may not know. The police.
I did that autopsy, and the body went in the cooler, and I did another autopsy.
Exactly.
And I'll be like,
I have no idea what happened.
I don't know what the DA did with it. I said, well, why don't you go down to the DA and ask? And she says, I don't go lurking around the DA's office asking.
I don't have other stuff to do.
No kidding. Yeah.
Well, more than that, also, it's inappropriate. Like it's professionally inappropriate for me to be pursuing cases outside of the realm of my expertise, because then I'm going to potentially bias my decisions. So
in our fiction, we can complete that story arc. Yes.
Fiction, we have the opportunity to make stuff up and satisfy those cravings. But in nonfiction, we can't do that. But, the majority of my cases, they'll either not catch the guy, or if they catch the guy, he has a plea deal, and I never even go to court. So
I think that's what happened actually with the case, the real case. Yeah. I think there was a plea deal, but we don't know very much more about it than that.
And Judy, I know you're very passionate about your profession as a forensic pathologist, and there's not a lot out there. People just don't say, that's what I want to be. And
when I grow up,
do it. And so I know you speak about a lot of it. I know, on social media, you're always talking about that. Can you expand on that? Because there's a difference between forensic pathologists and coroners and what that means. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, so the problem is that, the television shows have been abundant, but they don't really explain what the training requires. So in order to be a forensic pathologist—
So let's start with what a pathologist is. A pathologist is anytime you go into the hospital and they say, we have to do some tests. If those tests don't involve shooting x-rays at you, then whatever they take out of your body goes into usually the basement, where there are people looking through microscopes and determining what it is or isn't.
And then a forensic pathologist does autopsies, which are surgical examinations of the body, taking out the organs and looking at the outside of the body for signs of disease or injury, but specifically in cases that are sudden, violent, or unexpected. And a forensic pathologist can work in the construct of a medical examiner's office, where the office is run by doctors, or they could work for a coroner, often a sheriff coroner, but not always, where the office is run by law enforcement personnel or by administrators. The autopsy is still being done by a doctor.
By a forensic pathologist in the most cases and in the best cases.
Yeah, the problem is that pathology is not a required rotation in medical school. So after 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school, the majority of people go into fields that they know and have been exposed to, like OBGYN, delivering babies and helping women having surgery on women's genital tracts, surgery, pediatrics, even psychiatry has a required rotation, but pathology does not. So medical students are not generally exposed to it. Even in medical school, they don't necessarily know what the pathologist does. And then forensic pathology is a subspecialty of pathology, and they don't get very few medical schools have any exposure to forensic pathology in medical school. So unless someone knows about the field because they've watched the TV shows or they've read a book like Working Stiff, or they actively seek out electives in the field, they wouldn't necessarily know about this specialty. And it's a problem internationally. It's not just in the United States. There are not enough forensic pathologists to do the work.
But it's a serious structural problem in this country, partly because forensic pathologists generally work for a government agency, which has its advantages, but it also has its major disadvantages. And one of those is always money. There is no insurance code for an autopsy. So even in hospitals now, hospitals used to do autopsies routinely so that doctors could learn.
It was required for accreditation, and they removed that requirement.
They don't do it anymore because they can't charge an insurance company for it. It's a money loser.
Yeah.
They need to save that money. It's, I don't know.
And then
in the end, it means that we have about half the number of forensic pathologists in this country to cover the current workload that they have.
So there are plenty of jobs. So this is a job that, if you go into forensic,
it's open.
It's open. It's not competitive in the sense of that you can, you can be an average student and still get the job, and learn and do a good, do not just a competent, but a fantastic job. We can train you.
Yeah.
So
and then
it's all over the popular culture, but it's not really well valued in real life
within medicine.
In society. Yeah.
And I was going to say, so talk about how does that impact our communities? Because I know what you do has a lot to do with, law enforcement and crimes and how they're prosecuted. And so talk
public
about
health too.
Yeah. So the impact on communities. Yeah. So the two major impacts on communities are, number one, anytime someone dies suddenly or violently, there is a need to perform an autopsy, primarily for legal reasons, so we understand why they died. And it has financial implications for the family, because unless you've got a death certificate that says what the cause of death is, they can't, there's an emotional component. They have a feeling of, I don't have closure. And there's also a financial component where they can't inherit the wealth if it's contingent on the cause of death. And especially insurance settlements, insurance decisions are contingent on having a death certificate with a cause of death in many cases. So that delays that process. And in some cases, incorrect information is going out on death certificates where people are certifying the death based on kind of a best guess without an autopsy. That may be wrong. And you have all of our decision-making process with regards to where funds are going to go for law enforcement are contingent on how many homicides are there in that district, or how many accidents are in that area in terms of funding for accident prevention strategies or public service announcements, things like that. So our society has a need for autopsies, and yet nobody wants to pay for it. It's what is the equivalent is kind of like the lighthouse.
Yeah.
There's actually a wonderful, I think it was a Planet Money or an NPR, it was an NPR piece. It's called Lighthouses and Autopsies.
Yeah.
And it makes the comparison between the two.
It's the tragedy of the commons for anybody who's studied economics. It's something that we all need at some point, but no single one of us can pay for.
Because it's expensive, and unless we all come together and recognize that this is something that we need to fund as a society for the betterment of public health, for the betterment of the society, it just ends up getting ignored.
You don't see the pressing need for a lighthouse until you're the merchant on the dock waiting for your shipment to come, and it's at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for autopsies. But nobody sees the need for the medical examiner until, God forbid, they have a loved one who becomes an ME case.
Yeah. Well, and give us an example of the public health. There was just an article, and I was thinking of you both this, I think, weekend in the Sunday New York Times about let us speak for the dead, or those who speak for the dead. And there was this adding to the situation that you're talking about, where there's plenty of open jobs, but folks that are coming up in the medical profession don't know about pathology because it's not part of the standard rotation. We've also got like the opioid epidemic that is overflowing. Like it's increasing caseloads. So can you speak a little bit based on what you've seen or, worked on in the books around public health? Like how does that tie to this work and these opportunities?
So the best way I can speak to the public health aspects of what we do is a response to a critique or question I usually get of like, it must be great to be a forensic pathologist because your patients don't complain. Isn't it great? And so that's kind of, I mean, I get that all the time. But the thing that people don't understand is that the family members of the deceased person is not my patient. It's the family members who want to know what happened. And the family members who have a need to know what happened, because sometimes if I do an autopsy and I find a genetic defect that could have implications for other family members, then they need to go get tested, whether it's a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or familial polyposis, which predisposes them to cancer. They have not only a right to know, but a need to know in order to protect other family members. On a more global health perspective, we now are in the middle of, or the beginning of, an epidemic going into a pandemic for a virus, coronavirus, and it's in the news every single day. Well, if somebody dies in their home and they have not seen a doctor and they didn't go to the hospital, they need an autopsy to figure out why they died. And if, for instance, we find out that they had pneumonia and a coronavirus infection, now all of a sudden it's going to change how we're going to treat the other people who they've been in contact with, including their employees or their clients or the manager of the building or the neighbors, that they're potentially exposed and they may need to have to be quarantined or to be monitored to make sure that they don't have the illness.
Sorry, I ducked out there. I had to plug in, our computer was dying. I just had to.
No sweat.
So another joke I get, besides your patients don't complain, is you don't have to worry about killing anybody. You know, you don't save any lives in the medical examiner's office. And I argue that's not true.
It's not true at all, especially in this situation.
Right. So every pathologist who has diagnosed an infectious disease like tuberculosis or meningitis has saved lives. Every forensic pathologist who has recognized a carbon monoxide death and then gotten the management to figure out where the source of the carbon monoxide is coming from has saved a life.
Or if you don't do your job to the fullest extent that you should, and a murderer goes free and murders someone else, are you complicit in that happening? Or if you put somebody in jail, you take away that person's liberty and it turns out that they don't belong in jail, then that's a life that you've ruined. So there are high stakes in what a forensic pathologist does.
It's a very important part of our, not just a medical profession, but also the legal and the implications to society are huge.
Yeah. And Judy, how did you decide to move into this field?
Well, initially I wanted to be a surgeon. So
I remember that.
Yeah. So I started off actually in surgery, and the beginning of Working Stiff chronicles my misery in surgery. I discovered by doing surgery is really an exhausting training program. It's every other night on call. There's a lot of sleep deprivation. I have my own, separate opinions about whether it needs to be that way. I don't think it needs to be that way. But for me personally, it wasn't the right choice. I need a lot of sleep. I like sleep. I like being with my family members, with my husband. I like having children and having time to spend with them. The surgical lifestyle as it currently is being structured really is damaging to that. It doesn't have to be that way. The culture of surgery can and shall be changed. I think as more women go into the field, it's happening. But at the time, it wasn't a good fit for me. So I quit surgery and went into pathology just because the lifestyle was so much better, but I didn't have the passion for it that I had for surgery, because I like cutting things up. I like being involved. I like doing different things all the time. And pathology was pretty much sitting at a microscope all day. That's how I felt it was during my training, until I did my forensics rotation. And then I got to go out to death scenes, and I got to interact with the police, and I got to testify and see all the different things a forensic pathologist does. So the variety and the impact factor, impact people's lives, instead of just being hidden in the laboratory, but having direct contact with patients and with families, was very important.
And also, I think you found that the social work application of it, which you don't really think about and you're not told about until you're on the job, that you are a death counselor. Judy's very good at that. And I think that you found that very fulfilling. It is
fulfilling, but it's also hard. It's hard. I think because my father died when I was 13, so I went through grief very early in life, and learning how to deal with grief helps me in counseling families.
And Judy's father died by suicide. So when she talks to other families who have just suffered a suicide, she can speak to them on a very intimate level.
Yeah. And I assume it's just, as I'm listening to you talk about this, Judy, I'm thinking about the character in the book. And I can only imagine that she brings all of this, or parts of all of these skill sets into it. It must be fascinating, to write and then to read as well. Because there's so many, like,
it is, although it was really interesting to us that people hear, okay, so your detective is a blonde woman who is a medical examiner in San Francisco.
But it's real.
wife,
yeah,
right? Yeah. But
not,
she isn't. Jessie is not Judy,
us.
and she's not me. She has aspects of Judy's personality and aspects of my personality, but she really is her own person. And I had heard other fiction writers of books especially, say that the characters just take over, and it was spooky. It really happened. Where I'm just sitting there typing, and then all of a sudden I'm saying, wait, where are we going with this? I start arguing with my imaginary friends. Like, wait, Jessie, what do you mean? What? No, you can't do that, you know? And yeah, the characters do come out through your fingertips. So she isn't really based on us. She's kind of like another one of our children, really. Yeah.
But then when he gets stuck, like if he does he never has writer's block. If he gets stuck, he comes to me and goes, okay, I'm at this point in this scene. What would Jessie do next? Like, well, I know it. Well, I'll tell you what I would do next, and then we move on from there. So it helps unblock him.
That's awesome. And it's so like as I'm listening, I'm just like you actually moved out of pathology into forensics because you're like I enjoyed the death scenes. I enjoyed working with the detectives, the social work aspect. It's all you enjoy collaboration, Judy.
Like, I do.
You like
she's an extrovert. She's a major extrovert.
The other yin yang is I'm the extrovert, he's the introvert.
Yeah.
Which is why it was good that he was the stay-at-home dad. Because if I were home with the kids, they would be scheduled and miserable. And then
and if I had to go to work every day in an office with the same group of people, I'd go postal. Yeah, for sure.
So it worked out really well.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, I'm just keeping an eye on time. Any last questions? Stella, do you have anything last you want to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, this has been kind of gnawing at me. I've really enjoyed just listening to the two of you and watching the two of you interact. Like it's such a breath of fresh air. So, but I've been wondering this whole time, like when you look back to your younger selves, like your Harvard selves, did you anticipate like having a more traditional career trajectory? Like, TJ, did you expect to stay in film once in film? Like, were you surprised by your choice to be a stay-at-home dad? Like, are you the sorts of folks that tend to kind of take things as they come? Or was there this one chips are down moment where you said, you know what, nuts to the way that everyone else seems to be doing it, I got to do it my own way. So TJ, I'm curious.
For me especially, it's the former. I am definitely a flexible, let's take it as it comes, I don't have a plan kind of guy.
Okay.
I did want to work in film. I was a so-so actor. I don't really have the emotional self-assurance to be a good actor, but I was a very good director for theater, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought that would translate into film, that I could go out to Hollywood and be a film director, you know, as so many young men do think they can, and didn't take seriously the culture of Hollywood, which really is something that you have to be good at and want to be good at. And I was terrible at it and did not want to continue doing it. So it was not a hard choice. Yeah. No, it's not the interpersonals. It's the junior high school sort of things. Like
the culture of Hollywood.
The fact that quality is determined by how much something makes, not how good it actually is, things like that. But I always have been a writer, and I've always enjoyed writing. I never imagined that I would be a writer, much less of detective novels, much less be so steeped in death all the time. Really didn't think that was going to be part of the career arc. But I was very happy to sort of stumble into it. I think that Judy has had a much more rigid,
I'm directed
in a good way, rigid life plan that has more or less worked. Yeah.
No, I've always been, if you are familiar with the movie Election, I was Tracy Flick in high school. Like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to win this, and I'm going to do that. And that's always been who I am. I'm a planner and an organizer, and I have a vision, but I also, you know, when things don't work out, I can let it go. Like with surgery, it was devastating to me. I had this plan, I was going to be a surgeon, and when I was miserable, I had to revamp that plan, but then I had another plan. So but also if I can call us a successful married couple, which I believe we are, we have influenced each other and have changed each other. He's calmed me down so much. I was way more high strung. I mean, you see me high strung now, I'm way more high strung.
And we've accommodated each other for how we approach life and what we want to do with it together. And I think it's really worked out well for both of us.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think the shared value that we have, the overlap on the Venn, is that we love each other, and we have very similar, you know, shared values in terms of, you know, what we see in terms of.
I think also we're grateful for what what the other person does in the relationship. I especially love to tell people I'm the luckiest kind of writer. I'm a dilettante writer. I don't have to write anything I don't want to write.
Yeah,
I can take as much time as I want to write my novels. You know, my wife is a doctor. She makes a very good living. Thank you very much. Like, I don't have to write articles to make the rent sort of thing.
That's right.
I know people who do, and it's tough. It's very, very tough. I'm a lot luckier than that. And Judy has a dude raising her kids for her, so a lot of women.
Lucky too.
It works out both ways.
It does, yeah.
All right, so I think then, Sarah, do you have any other questions that occur to you?
No, I'm good. I just always a joy, and it's so good to see you guys.
Well, and so yes, always a joy. And I think we maybe end this conversation where we started, which is partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So bringing it full circle, how's that for a narrative arc? And if folks are now enraptured with the idea of your books and your writing and are like, oh, I've never thought about this before. I need to read these. Where can they go to learn more about your work?
Yeah, you want to answer
Well,
that?
our splash page is drworkingstiff.com, drworkingstiff.com.
And we'll also post the link for folks if they need it.
I'll have it all up there. Right.
Yeah.
That's where you can get more information about our books and find links to buy them.
Right, and we're also active on social media. We're on Facebook at Dr. Working Stiff, but also Dr. Judy Malinek. So we keep kind of somewhat different personas in the sense that the Dr. Working Stiff is primarily about our collaborative writing, and Dr. Judy Malinek is about primarily science, forensics, and a little bit of politics, especially since it's election season. Right
and we also maintain Twitter feeds, both of us. Judy especially is 45,000 followers or something like that. She's got a great Twitter feed.
So we have Twitter feeds, and I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram as well.
Excellent. All right. So Judy, TJ.
Oh, one more thing.
Go.
Let me tell you when it comes to, especially the first cut,
Yeah.
if you want to buy an autographed copy of the book, you can go to the website for Green Apple Books in San Francisco, which is our local bookstore. And they have signed copies. And if they run out of signed copies, we go up there and sign some more.
Yeah.
And they ship anywhere in the United States for 99 cents. So if you want a copy of Working Stiff, first cut, it's easy to get.
Or Working Stiff, either one, actually. Yeah. You just have to write that you want a signed copy in the comments section when you order it.
When you check out.
All right. Hot tip. You heard it here, folks. Last words, Judy, TJ, about partnership and collaboration. What have you learned over the course of your collaboration and partnership with one another that you just want to leave folks with as an encouragement and inspiration?
I learned something that all parents learn, which is humility and flexibility.
Yeah.
That I don't know what I'm doing, but I can learn it and I will learn it and I have to learn it.
Good.
As your child develops, you develop into the parent that child needs. And I think that we've taken that same attitude to our writing.
Yeah.
That's how we figured out how to be writers of books, I think.
Yeah, and I think it is important to thank each other. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how much we make a conscious effort to, thank you for doing this, thank you for doing that, and passing things back and forth, but also appreciating what the person brings to the mix, and also recognizing our strengths and weaknesses. There's some things that I'll pass on to TJ because I don't know what to do with this here, and then it's outside of his skill set. He doesn't know how to do it, so I take it back, and then we sometimes will troubleshoot and work on things together. So recognizing both the humility of recognizing your own incapacity or inability to do certain things, but also your partner's incapacity to do certain things, and then either hiring someone to do it if neither one of you has that skill. I mean, sometimes you have to do that as a business.
But also when you embrace that humility, it gives you the confidence to do the things that you do know that you can do to the best of your ability. Right. And you are not shy about knowing what you can do. Yeah. And that's a big part of working in a partnership.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for today. It was so much fun and so great. And we'll share links with everybody to get Dr. Melnick's and TJ's books. Those will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here. And we'll meet you. Yeah, we'll see you down the road.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, guys.